Hello everyone, my name is Pixlriffs and welcome back to the Minecraft Survival Guide. I hope you're all having a good day. This is going to be a bit of a different episode to the usual kind of stuff because I have been thinking about for a while what it would be like to create an episode all about redstone components. And I get asked this quite a lot. I do a lot of practical redstone stuff in this series where we make redstone circuits like, these item sorters that I've got here in my storage system. We have a shulker box unloader up here upstairs. We have a shulker box loader downstairs, and a lot of the time on those videos I get questions like, hey, how exactly does a comparator work? And a lot of the time I get kind of confused by those questions because I feel like I've just showed one way that a comparator can work, but I think a lot of people want to absorb the theory of redstone a little bit more. They want to understand each component individually before they feel like they can start using some of this stuff in circuits and contraptions and everything else. So this episode of the Minecraft Survival Guide is going to focus on what each redstone component does, specifically how it behaves. We won't always be able to use these in a contraption in this video because that would involve building like 50 redstone contraptions in a single video, but rest assured that we'll use all of these at some point in this series, so if you learn better from practical examples, stick around for future episodes. If you want a little redstone theory, on the other hand, hopefully this video will get your head around it. And I'm sorry to say that unfortunately this guide won't cover many of the differences between Bedrock and Java Edition, because frankly, I don't know enough about redstone on Bedrock Edition to know where the differences are. I just know that some aspects of it are different. So Bedrock players, I'm sorry, some of this may be relevant to you, some of it may not, and I can't exactly tell you which is which. So I recommend looking up a more technical YouTuber like Prowl8413 or Silent Whisperer if you want to know the ins and outs of Bedrock Redstone a little bit better. Something tells me I'm going to need to clear my inventory out for this one though, so let's throw a bunch of this stuff in here. We'll put that in the shulker box loader and then we'll get down to business. Oh, and one last thing before we begin, we're not going to be covering rails and minecarts in this episode because I think they deserve a video all on their own. They're quite complex, there's lots of different concepts we can get to, so more about those later. But without further ado, let's return to the testing area that I've set up upstairs and let's begin our redstone education. Before we get into what every single redstone component is and does, we probably should define some broad categories of redstone components we're going to be looking at. So there are three of these categories that I think I generally consider most redstone stuff to be in. There are power components, there are transmission components, and there are mechanism components or output components. Power components are the ones that produce redstone power, things like redstone blocks and redstone torches of course, but also levers, daylight sensors, or observers are all examples of power components. Transmission components transmit the redstone power like redstone dust or repeaters. Transmission components like repeaters and comparators also have the potential to modify the signal strength. And finally, output components, the mechanism components, are the ones that react to receiving redstone power and produce some sort of effect, like redstone lamps and pistons, dispensers, even stuff like doors and fence gates. And that doesn't mean you always have to use each of these components this way. They can have a few different effects in different combinations. For example, you might use a note block to trigger an observer, which is going to light up a redstone lamp and also open and close an iron door. While the note block isn't technically the power component, the observer is doing that. To the user, the note block is the input for this redstone contraption. So a lot of redstone components end up getting used in interesting and different ways. Signal strength measures how much power a redstone component can output or carry. This is a number between 0, which is no redstone power, and 15, the maximum any redstone component can output. Most power components produce a power of 15 at the source, so where you start to see the signal strength come into play is with redstone dust, which we typically use to carry power from one place to another. At its source, the redstone dust holds the signal strength it receives from the power source, and for each block it travels from there, the power decreases by 1. You can see the redstone dust's brightness kind of fading until right here at the end it is barely fizzling at a power level of 1, but it's lit all of these redstone lamps in the process. And all redstone components that need power, like redstone lamps, but also like pistons, dispensers, and trapdoors, can be powered by any signal strength above 0. A redstone lamp doesn't care if it's getting signal strength 1 or 15, it's going to light up all the same. Signal strength can also be measured by comparators for various reasons, and even a low signal strength can be boosted back up to the maximum by certain components. Pulse length is the term we use to describe how long a redstone component outputs power. We usually measure this in redstone ticks, which take up 1/10 of a second. So if a stone or a black stone button powers something for 10 redstone ticks, it has a pulse length of 1 second. Wood buttons provide power for 15 redstone ticks or 1.5 seconds. Observers have a very short pulse length, and other components such as levers or pressure plates have a variable pulse length determined by how long the lever is switched on or how long you're standing on the pressure plate. It will also be helpful to understand the concept of strong power and weak power. If a redstone power source provides strong power to a solid block, the block can transfer power through it to the neighboring block or redstone component. If it provides weak power, it can power adjacent components but cannot transfer the power through a solid block and out the other side. And I find this is easiest to demonstrate using redstone lamps. A component which powers a redstone lamp will light it up. If we place another redstone lamp connected to the first, we can see whether the component only lights the first lamp or if it lights both of them. This shows us whether or not a component provides weak power or strong power to adjacent blocks. It's worth noting that weak power doesn't have to stay weak, and strong power doesn't always stay strong. For example, a redstone block, which outputs weak power to its adjacent blocks, can power a redstone repeater, which provides strong power to the block it's facing into. And as far as explaining the components individually go, that seems like a pretty good place to start. A block of redstone is a pretty simple power source. It provides weak power to the components attached to any of its 6 faces, provided of course that they can receive power from that direction. The natural advantage of a redstone block is that it's a solid block. It can be pushed by pistons, allowing for a power source in a circuit to move. It also can't be washed away by water the way some other components can. Redstone dust is like wire. Its job is to transfer power from one place to another. But it's wire you have a limited amount of control over. A single piece of redstone dust is placed in a plus shape. When it is powered, it provides strong power to components horizontally in all 4 directions, weak power to the block it is placed on, and no power directly above it. You can right-click on the redstone dust to shape it into a dot. This prevents it from powering anything around it except the block it is placed on. Redstone dust can receive power from redstone components on any side or directly above and below. In the case of powered solid blocks, it only receives power from strong powered blocks, and not from weakly powered blocks. For example, some redstone dust weakly powering this solid block does not power the redstone dust underneath, and this can actually be an advantage since it allows redstone wiring to be more compact. But as we've already seen, connecting a redstone dust to a power source or a transmission component, like another piece of redstone dust or a repeater, shapes it into a line, and, most importantly, its behavior changes. Now it will only transmit power to blocks it runs directly over the top of or directly into. Notably, it will not be redirected into most redstone components. I'm sure most of us were surprised the first time we placed some redstone dust running past a piston or a redstone lamp, and we were surprised when powering the redstone dust did nothing to the mechanism components. This, by the way, is one of the differences that I am aware of between Bedrock Edition and Java. On Bedrock Edition, some output components do redirect the redstone wire into them, but on Java, they typically don't do this. The way we typically get around this is to run the redstone dust on top of the solid blocks alongside the redstone components we want to power. The block below the redstone dust receives the weak power, which activates a single adjacent component, or additional components if we place them around the edges of the blocks. But the idea is that this allows the signal strength to act on each set of blocks individually. A redstone torch is a power source which powers stuff in more or less the opposite way to redstone dust. It provides strong power directly above it, and weak power around each side, and no power to the block it's attached to. The most notable difference is that it can be placed on the side of a block, providing weak power to components below it, but preventing it from powering the block it's attached to. This is important because powering the block a redstone torch is attached to switches it off. And this allows for a couple of remarkably simple but really useful applications of redstone torches. Firstly, they can be used to reverse the action of another component. Normally, a lever would power this line of redstone dust. But if we begin the circuit with a redstone torch, the dust is powered by default, and switching on the lever switches off the power to the redstone dust. Secondly, since they provide strong power directly above them, one redstone torch can switch off another redstone torch placed on a block directly above. If you have yet another redstone torch on a block above that, switching on and off the bottom torch affects the top torch. This can be incredibly useful for transferring a redstone signal upwards, since a redstone torch tower like this can be built in a 1-block footprint, although the torches do take a fraction of a second to react to any changes, so this can add up to a significant delay if your tower is particularly tall. Levers and buttons are pretty self-explanatory. Levers only react to player inputs. They can be activated by right-clicking on them, and they provide strong power to the block they're attached to, and weak power to any other components around them. The power is provided constantly until the lever is deactivated. Buttons provide power the same way, but for a fixed duration. As I mentioned earlier, stone or blackstone buttons provide 1 second of redstone power or 10 redstone ticks, while wooden buttons provide 1.5 seconds of power or 15 redstone ticks. Notably, wooden buttons can also be activated by arrows, which keep the button pressed until the arrow is collected or until it despawns after 60 seconds, and in the case of infinity bow users, you'll find that you can't collect the arrows at all, so the arrow has to wait to despawn. Stone and blackstone buttons, on the other hand, cannot be activated by arrows. Pressure plates provide power in the same way. Strong power for the block they're placed on, and weak power to blocks on the other 5 sides. The duration depends on how long something is weighing down the pressure plates, and that's where we can have some fun. Stone-type pressure plates can only be pressed by players, mobs, or simulations of mobs, like armor stands. Other entities, like boats and minecarts, can't activate pressure plates on their own, but they will activate pressure plates if a mob or a player is riding them. Wooden pressure plates can be activated by any entity, including dropped items, and will remain activated until those items are removed. This means one item can activate a pressure plate for up to 5 minutes before it despawns. Now, a player or a hopper minecart could collect the items before that happens. Alternatively, throwing another of the same item onto the pressure plate will group the items together into a stack, resetting the 5-minute despawn timer on the first item. Even if the item or mob immediately leaves the pressure plate, wood and stone pressure plates will always activate for a minimum of 1 second. There are 2 other types of pressure plates called weighted pressure plates. The light-weighted pressure plate is made of gold, and the heavy one is made of iron. Like the wooden pressure plate, these can both be activated by mobs or players or other entities. They have a minimum pulse length of half a second, which is why it's sometimes awkward getting through doors with weighted pressure plates to open and close them. These weighted pressure plates output a variable redstone signal depending on how many entities are weighing them down. Gold pressure plates will increase their output signal for every additional item they detect up to a maximum of 15, while iron pressure plates increase their output signal for every 10 items after the first is thrown on. It's also worth noting in both cases that a stack only counts as one entity, so if you throw on a bunch of the same item, eventually they're going to group up, and the pressure plate will only count that as one thing. Tripwire is another component that's activated by entities, although it requires a bit more setup. Tripwire hooks must be attached to solid blocks on either side and connected by string placed in a straight line between the two. This makes the minimum footprint of a tripwire circuit 5 blocks wide. Any entity which steps into the hitbox of the string will activate the tripwire hooks, which provide strong power to the blocks they're attached to. Stepping through the block space of the tripwire hook itself will not activate the circuit. But remember that tripwire isn't just activated by players and mobs. You can also activate it by throwing items through it, or even firing arrows into it, as long as the arrow's hitbox still overlaps with the tripwire. An observer's job is to detect when a block in front of it changes somehow. When it notices a change, whether it's a block being placed or broken, a barrel being opened, a plant growing, or even a note block being tuned, it powers the output for a single redstone tick. This is very convenient behavior, both because it allows us to generate redstone power from things which aren't inherently redstone components, and because a 1-tick pulse is a very short period of power. This can detach objects from sticky pistons in Java Edition, briefly power components which might benefit from a single redstone pulse, and it has a variety of other uses. Daylight detectors, sometimes called daylight sensors, output a variable redstone signal depending on their exposure to sunlight. When placed on the surface, they output a maximum signal strength of 15 when the sun is at its highest. This gradually decreases as night falls, dropping to 0 for the majority of the night, and then gradually builds again as the sun rises and the sky brightens. Right-clicking on a daylight sensor inverts it, and the signal will decrease as the day gets brighter and increase as it gets darker. Players will sometimes call the inverted daylight detector a moonlight detector for short. When placed indoors, it can only react to the amount of daylight it can detect, and it isn't affected by block light at all. Target blocks are a power component which produces a short pulse of power when hit by a projectile. They produce a variable signal strength depending on how close to the center of the target the projectile hits, with a bullseye being the maximum signal strength of 15. The projectile doesn't need to be fired by a player either. It can be an arrow shot by a pillager, a snow golem snowball, an egg fired from a dispenser, or even a llama spitting at them. The target block also has the rather useful property of being a solid block which redirects redstone dust into itself, allowing it to provide power to other components from there. Redstone repeaters are transmission components with a few different uses. They're always placed with their input towards the player and the output facing away. The input will take any signal strength above 0 and output signal strength 15, so they are typically used to extend redstone wire if it needs to travel further than 15 blocks. They can also act as a diode, ensuring redstone power only flows in one direction, since they only input on one side and output on the other. Repeaters always add at least 1/10 of a second of delay to a circuit. As I mentioned earlier, this is typically referred to as a redstone tick. We can increase the delay by 1 tick each time we right-click on the repeater to a maximum of 4 ticks. So in order to create a full second of delay, we could place 3 repeaters in a line, 2 set to 4 ticks and 1 here set to 2 ticks. When we flick this lever, it takes a full second for the redstone signal to reach this lamp and turn it on. This property of repeaters is frequently useful in creating circuits like basic redstone clocks, or when precise timing is needed to make sure that the components of your circuit are triggered in the right order. Repeaters also have a useful role in isolating separate lines of redstone current. Since redstone dust will connect if placed side by side like this, repeaters allow you to isolate separate lines of redstone wire, with the downside of potentially introducing a little delay. The last thing we'll cover is a lesser used aspect of repeaters. A repeater with another powered repeater or comparator facing into its side will become locked in its current state, either powered or unpowered. I don't think I've ever actually used this in a redstone contraption, but for making more complex circuits, it's bound to come up occasionally. Now the moment we've all been waiting for, redstone comparators are placed the same way as redstone repeaters, and they have 4 major uses. The simplest is to maintain signal strength. Unlike repeaters, which boost the signal back to 15, the signal that goes into a comparator will be exactly the same when it comes out the other side. This can be useful in a variety of situations where you need a specific signal strength to activate the components of a circuit. I find it useful when turning corners in contraptions like this, where this piston here is already going to be activated, but we need to make sure that these 3 in the next row are activated, and we can't just boost the signal strength to 15 without activating all 3 of these pistons at once. As we throw some items onto this pressure plate here, we find that each of the pistons is able to activate in turn without the comparator turning the corner and activating the remainder of the circuit. The comparator's next function, which is the one from which it takes its name, is to compare signal strength from 2 sources. The comparator receives an input from the back and an input from the side. If the signal strength from the side input is higher than the rear input, the comparator doesn't output any power. Once the rear input reaches the same signal strength or higher, the comparator will output whatever signal strength it's receiving as an input. This allows you to cut off a signal if it isn't strong enough. To demonstrate, here are 2 weighted pressure plates. The side input is more picky about what component it detects. We can't put a pressure plate right here. We need to wire it in using redstone dust, a repeater, or another comparator. Once we've done that, we can throw 3 items onto the pressure plate wired into the side of the comparator. And now the comparator won't output a signal until the rear pressure plate has 3 or more items on it. This setup can also help us with the comparator's third function, which is to subtract signal strength. Right-clicking on the comparator will activate this redstone torch here by the output, which means the comparator is now in subtract mode. Now it will take the rear signal strength, subtract the side input signal strength, and output the result. So if we have 5 items on the rear pressure plate and put 2 items on the side pressure plate, the output signal here is 3. And once again, if the side input is greater than the rear input, the comparator switches off entirely. The comparator's final function, and arguably its most useful, is to measure block states, and we typically use this to measure how full a container is. The easiest example is a chest. The more the chest fills up with items, the higher the output signal from the comparator. But this also takes stack sizes into account, so even if all the slots of the chest are occupied by items, it won't produce the maximum signal strength until all those items are full stacks. Whether that's a stack of 64 regular items, a stack of 16 if you're dealing with items like ender pearls or eggs, or a single item if you're dealing with unstackable stuff like tools, boats, or buckets of lava. Comparators can measure anything which stores items, like furnaces, for example. Filling up the fuel slot with a stack of items will output a signal strength of 5. Adding in a stack of items to smelt will bring that total to 10. If it also had 64 items in the output slot, the signal strength would max out at 15. One of the biggest advantages of this behavior is that the comparator can measure a container on the other side of a solid block. With a block between the furnace and the comparator, it's still detecting the items inside the furnace, letting you build solid walls between your container and the redstone circuitry. But as we said earlier, it's not just about containers. I said comparators can also measure block states. We've used this already for a couple of contraptions in the survival guide world, like the honey farm, which detects when the honey level of a bee nest reaches 5. When that happens, the comparator outputs a high enough signal strength to wrap back around and activate the dispenser, which collects the honey using a glass bottle. One of the coolest things you can measure is an item in an item frame. The comparator will detect the position of the item as you rotate it and output a signal strength between 1 and 8, increasing by 1 each time you rotate the item 45 degrees. Lecterns also have a neat interaction with comparators. If you equip them with a written book which has multiple pages, the comparator will output a redstone signal equivalent to what proportion of the book has been read in the lectern. For example, here on page 1 we start off with 1 signal strength, but if I turn the page, it gets increased to 8, and beyond that, increases all the way to the maximum signal strength. Without a comparator attached, turning the page of a book in a lectern will actually emit a redstone signal all on its own, a short pulse of a single redstone tick every time a page is turned. Comparators can also measure how much of a cake is left, starting at a signal strength of 14 and decreasing by 2 for each slice that's eaten. There are a handful of other comparator interactions which we'll explore elsewhere in the series, and for more information in the meantime, you can check out the Minecraft wiki. Hoppers are used to move items from one place to another. When placed against a block, the hopper's output can face in any horizontal direction or downwards, and if there's a container attached to the output, any items placed in the hopper will gradually be pushed out one at a time into the container. Items can be instantly collected if they fall into the hopper from the top, placed in the hopper interface by right-clicking on it, or slowly pulled in from a container above the hopper. Hoppers are capable of pulling and pushing items every 4 redstone ticks, or 0.4 seconds, meaning it takes just over 25 seconds for a hopper to pull or push a full stack of items in or out. Whenever a hopper is powered by redstone, it is locked and is unable to pull, push, or collect items. This doesn't prevent the player from interacting with the hopper's inventory slots, and it doesn't prevent attached hoppers below from pulling items out of it. We're quite familiar with pistons and sticky pistons at this point. They always try to face towards the player when placed. Regular pistons will simply push blocks, or break them in some cases, although of course there are some blocks like obsidian and bedrock which can't be pushed using pistons. Sticky pistons can both push and pull blocks attached to the piston's head, although if they receive a short enough redstone pulse, such as a 1-tick pulse from an observer or a lectern, they will eject the block. One of the more tricksy aspects of pistons in Java Edition, and one that's entirely absent from Bedrock Edition, is the quirk of Quasiconnectivity. This trait allows a piston to be powered by a block diagonally above it. This is easiest to demonstrate in the case of piston doors, where both pistons in a sliding door can be powered by a single redstone component attached to the top piston. My favourite explanation of this comes from technical Minecraft YouTuber Logical Geek Boy, who described this as pistons acting like a door does. If you power the top block of a door, the bottom block has to open too. What's weird about pistons is they don't need this top block to exist at all. And once the piston is powered like this, we can actually remove the power component and the piston stays extended. They usually stay like this until you change a neighboring block, causing a block update where the piston realizes it's no longer receiving power and retracts. It might be easy to get confused between dispensers and droppers. They do look pretty similar, and they do mostly the same thing. Visually, the dispenser is the one with the round aperture, while the dropper has more of a smiley face V-shaped output. When placed vertically, the dispenser's output remains round, and the dropper's becomes more of a rectangle. In terms of what they do, the droppers are probably the easier one to explain. When activated by redstone power, one item from the inventory spaces in the dropper will be spat out in the direction the dropper is facing, in this case, vertically. However, if there's a container in front of the dropper's output, the item will be pushed into the container instead of falling onto the floor as a dropped item entity. This can even be another dropper, allowing you to use droppers for item transport if they're activated in the right sequence. If you want the dropper to spit out multiple items, you'll need to activate it multiple times with short pulses of redstone power, which is where redstone clock circuits can be useful. In future, we'll cover circuits designed to detect when a dropper has contents and immediately spit them out, which is useful for item transportation and sorting. Dispensers spit out most items the way a dropper does, and with the same randomized order from the dispenser's inventory. However, they can't be used to feed items into another container, and certain items have specific behaviors when used with a dispenser. For example, dispensers can be used to equip armor onto a valid mob, player, or even an armor stand. If you want them to, they can even place the armor stand first. Dispensers will fire arrows and other projectiles, including splash potions and eggs. They can place boats in water and minecarts on rails. They can light fires using flint and steel, shear sheep, wax copper, place shulker boxes. There's a long list, and you can find all of those on the Minecraft wiki. Note blocks can produce a range of sounds depending on what block they're placed on. They can be tuned within a range of 2 octaves from F sharp to F sharp by right-clicking on them. Activating them with a redstone pulse plays the note that they're tuned to. Despite their primary function being to produce sound, note blocks are commonly found in redstone contraptions because playing them with redstone power, tuning them by hand, or using a piston to change the block below them to change the instrument are all single block state changes which can be detected by an observer. This makes note blocks a very helpful block in circuits which use observers, because many other redstone components change state twice when they receive a pulse of redstone power. They switch on and switch off, and both of those state changes are detected by observers, multiplying the amount of pulses traveling through the chain. Lightning round. Lightning rods emit redstone power for 4 redstone ticks when they're struck by lightning, so you can try your Frankenstein roleplay and use the charge from a lightning rod to power a dispenser which places a carved pumpkin on a T-shape of iron blocks and makes an iron golem. This one's a no-brainer because we've been using them the entire episode. Redstone lamps light up when they receive redstone power and switch off when it gets taken away. TNT is also a no-brainer because your brains will get blown up if you stand too close to it. TNT can be lit up with a flint and steel up close, from a flame bow at a distance, or by redstone power if you want to set it off safely and automatically. Unlike other explosions, on Java Edition, TNT drops 100% of the blocks it destroys. Unfortunately, this isn't the case on Bedrock Edition yet, but it does allow us to farm resources on Java Edition using TNT as the catalyst. You can also dispense primed TNT, which if it doesn't fall away from the dispenser will destroy the dispenser as well. We will have a lot more to say about TNT and redstone in future episodes. Doors, trapdoors, and fence gates all open when they receive redstone power. Note that this doesn't just change the state, it sets the state to open. So if your trapdoor was already open, redstone power will hold it open and then close it for you once the redstone power goes away. Iron doors and trapdoors have to be activated by redstone power, they can't be opened manually. There are no iron fence gates. Here's one you don't see all that often. Trapped chests emit redstone power when you open them, and the power shuts off again when the chest closes. As the name suggests, this is typically used for traps, like a circuit that opens a trapdoor below someone who tries to steal your stuff. But it has its practical uses outside of pranking, and unlike a regular container where a hopper underneath it will start pulling items in as soon as you place them in there, the redstone power from a trap chest can power a hopper, locking it while you have the chest GUI open. So the hopper doesn't immediately start pulling out your items until you're certain you put the right stuff in there, and you're not about to put your diamond shovel into the hopper you use to send items for waste disposal. And finally, slime blocks and honey blocks are used in a lot of redstone contraptions where you need to push or pull stuff around, but just one sticky piston won't do. Both blocks stick to most materials, but they won't stick to each other. Slime can conduct redstone power, but honey doesn't. Slime bounces falling blocks, mobs, and other entities, while honey causes them to slide down slowly and prevents them from bouncing. And trust me, you haven't seen the last of slime and honey blocks in this series. But you have seen the last of this video, because that's where we're going to leave it for this episode of the Minecraft Survival Guide. I do hope you've enjoyed this look at all of the redstone components and what they do. Hopefully you learned something from this, and if not, stick around for the remainder of the series where I'm sure we will be tackling a bunch more redstone contraptions in the near future. For now, that's going to be it from me. Thank you so much for watching. My name has been Pixlriffs. Don't forget to leave a like on this video if you enjoyed it, subscribe if you want to see more, and I'll see you folks soon. Take care. Bye for now.